Well, Pericles has a problem, and his problem is that he's the leader of a democracy at a time of war, and the war with Sparta isn't going very well for Athens. No, you probably could have guessed that after I talked about the Spartans last time we were together. The Spartans are tough, and well, they're winning, and they're winning big. And as Pericles walks around Athens, he hears people talking, and people are saying, there's no way we can win this war. There's no way we can beat these Spartans. They're tough. Last week they sent out their 10-year-old girls out after us. Tore us up big time. There's no way we can beat these people. We might as well just give up. I mean, why should me, my father, my brother go off and die in this war when we know we're going to lose? There's no way we can defeat the Spartans. We might as well just give up. Now we know what's going to happen when we give up. The Spartans will make us their slaves. But hey, we'll get out of it with our lives. At least we'll be alive. I mean, being a dead Athenian never did anybody any good. At least we'll get out of this with our lives. I mean, we're better off being live slaves than being dead Athenians. We might as well just give up. And now Pericles has a problem, and that is that he's the leader of a democracy. And the assembly meets every 10 days on schedule. And all it takes at the end of one of these meetings is for Pericles to say, now, are there any citizens here who have any issues we haven't talked about? And all it takes is under Athenian law for two citizens to say, we want to present an issue, and two citizens stand up and say, we have an issue, we think we ought to give up. And there's no way that Pericles can say that's not a legitimate issue to talk about. I mean, that is the issue to talk about. And Pericles is afraid if it comes to a vote, the majority of the citizens are going to say, let's just give up and get out of this war, get out of this thing with our lives. And now Pericles believes in democracy. If the majority of the citizens tell him to surrender, then the very next day he'll go out and surrender his city into slavery to the Spartans, but he doesn't want to. And that's his problem. Well, there's another battle. The Spartans win again. And another group of dead Athenian soldiers are brought back to Athens to be buried. Pericles takes the opportunity to make a speech. It's a speech which has gone down in history as one of the most famous and most effective political speeches in world history. It's a speech called Pericles' funeral oration. That word oration is a fancy word that means a speech. And when you come back through and do your reviewing, make sure that you don't be confused. It's not a speech given at Pericles' funeral, but the speech that Pericles gives at a funeral for some dead Athenian soldiers. And Pericles starts off the speech pretty much by saying what I just told you. I'm going to paraphrase and summarize the speech for you. You can find Pericles' funeral oration on YouTube with various people reading it. It takes about 18 minutes to listen to. I'm going to summarize it and paraphrase it for you. Pericles starts off by saying pretty much, what I've said. I understand what the people in the city are thinking. You want to surrender. You ask yourself, why should we go off and die in this war when we know we're going to lose? We're better off being live slaves than dead Athenians. And Pericles says, I understand what you're saying, but you've got it exactly wrong. Pericles says, you're better off being a dead Athenian than a live slave. And Pericles begins to remind his listeners of what makes Athens a unique place in the ancient world. And the very first thing on his list, I'm going to give you a list of what I'm going to call 4 Athenian values that Pericles says are unique about Athens, what makes Athens special in the world. And the first on the list, I just finished talking about democracy. Pericles says we don't model our form of government on anybody else. In fact, we're a model to the rest of the world. Pericles reminds his listeners that if you live in Athens, you live in the only place in the world where the citizens have the power, where the people have the power. The people make the decisions. The citizens make the decisions. Pericles reminds his listeners that of the long process of the development of democracy. But Pericles says it all started off when our great-great-great-grandparents decided we didn't need some little dictator bossing us around. That the people have the power. We don't need to be bossed around. We can make our own decisions. Pericles says, look, if we give up, you might as well say that you do need to be bossed around, because if we give up and become slaves, the Spartans are going to boss us around for the rest of our lives. And not only are they going to boss us around, they're going to boss our kids around. And they're going to boss your kids' kids around. And they're going to boss your great-great-grandkids around. And Pericles says, if you go out and you die for Athens, yeah, you're going to be dead. And being dead never did anybody any good, but at least you're going to die saying something. You're going to die saying, you're not going to boss me around. And for that matter, you're not going to boss my kids around. Not as long as I've got anything to say about it. Not as long as I've got any life left, you're not going to boss my kids around. If you're going to boss my kids around, you're going to have to kill me first. Because as long as I'm alive, you're not going to boss my kids around, you're not going to boss my grandkids around. And Pericles says, not only that, what about this? What if it's true? What if it's true that people don't need to be bossed around? What if it's true that people living in dictatorships and people living in slavery who think they need to be bossed around, what if they realize, wait a second, no, you don't need to be bossed around? And if you die for Athens, Pericles says, yeah, you're going to be dead. But at least you died pointing your finger in the face of the bully and saying, you're not going to boss me around, you're not going to boss my kids around, for that matter, you're not going to boss anybody else around. Not as long as I've got anything to say about it. At least you die saying something. Pericles goes on to another value, what we'll call individualism. Pericles says if you die for Athens, you die for a place that believes that you have individual talents and gifts and abilities. Pericles says, if you live in Athens, you live in the only place in the world where you can walk up to a little kid on a street corner, say a 10-year-old little kid on a street corner and say, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid's got an answer for you. Everywhere else in the world, you come up to a little kid on a street corner and say, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid looks at you kind of funny. Doesn't know what you're asking. Doesn't even understand the question. Or maybe thinks he understands the question and says, well, my father's a carpenter, so I'm going to be a carpenter. Or you walk a few more blocks, ask another kid, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid doesn't understand what you mean. Says, well, my dad's a farmer, I'm going to be a farmer. And doesn't even understand what you mean. But in Athens, Pericles says, we think that every individual has their own gifts and talents and abilities. And your job in life is to find out what you do best. We don't expect our kids to go into the family business, although an awful lot do. It's not that there's anything wrong with that, because they grow up in the business, they come to love the business, they know the business, but it's not expected. What is expected is that every kid, as they grow up, finds out what they do best, and then they do it. Because if everybody in the city does what they do best, then the city is stronger. Take a look at our enemies, Pericles would say. We don't dress our toddlers up in camouflage diapers and march them around the playground. If you go up to a 10-year-old boy or girl in Sparta and say, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? The kid says, I already am grown up, but I'm a soldier. But we don't do that to our kids. We don't force them into a mold. We expect our kids to be who they are as individuals. And Pericles says if you die for Athens, well, yeah, you'll be dead. But at least you died for a place that gave you the space in your life to become the best person you could be. Pericles goes on to another value, what we'll call humanism. Now, this word humanism is one of those words that has different meanings in different contexts, okay? What I mean when I use humanism here is the value of human life, the importance, the specialness of human life. Pericles says if you live in Athens, you live in a place where we live in the only place in the world where we don't offer human sacrifices to the gods, even though the gods tell us we have to. And even though the gods say they're mad at us that we don't. Hundreds of years ago, we looked the gods in the eye, figuratively speaking, and we said we don't care. Not even the gods can demand a human sacrifice, because human life is special and sacred. And we told the gods, look, you want to get mad at us? Get mad at us. You want to punish us? Punish us. We don't care. We'll take whatever you got, because no matter what, we're not going to offer human sacrifices to you. Now here Pericles is a bit inaccurate. Okay. As it turns out, there is at the time one other group of people in the world who aren't offering human sacrifices to the gods. Human sacrifice is much more common in the ancient world than I think anybody wants to admit, to be honest. Very, very common. But there is one other group of people in the ancient world at this point who aren't offering human sacrifices to the gods. But we'll cut Pericles some slack, okay? He's never heard of them. and they're a very tiny group of people to begin with. And so we'll cut him some slack. I mean, he's practically right. We'll catch up to those people later on in this, but we'll cut him some slack here. I mean, he's practically right. And Pericles says if you die for Athens, then you die for a place that values human life. And as contradictory as that may sound, as ironic as that may sound, if you die for Athens, you die for a place that says we're going to do everything we can to protect the sacredness of human life. And the fourth Athenian value, rationalism, the life of the mind, thinking about things. Pericles says, if you die for Athens, you die for a place that values your mind and your thought. Athens is a place, Pericles says, where we like smart people. We like scientists. We think it's cool that people like to think about science and philosophy and big questions. In fact, Pericles says, we think science is so cool, we took city tax money and we purchased a piece of property so that all the scientists would have a place to hang out and talk about science stuff, because we think that's kind of cool. Pericles says, if you live in Athens, you live in a place that values your education. If you are born into a citizen's family and you want to learn how to read and write, Pericles says, hey, for decades now, we'll take city tax money and pay your teachers. Because we figure the more people around here who know how to read and write, the better off we are as a city. If you want to learn, we'll pay your teachers, because we think that improves the city. Pericles says if you go to an assembly meeting and an issue comes up about which you want to express an opinion, and you get in line and you make it up to the podium, well, the last thing we want to hear is how you feel about anything. Because frankly, nobody but your grandma really cares about how you feel. What we care about is what you think. What are your thoughts? Give us a good argument. Don't appeal to emotion. Don't make us cry. Don't say we have to do something for the children. Don't say we have to do something for the elderly. Just give us a good argument. Don't make us feel sorry. Don't make us feel guilty. Don't make us feel sad. Just tell us, what's the problem? How do we fix the problem? How do we know that when the problem is solved? Take us step by step through the problem. We value your thoughts. We want to know what your thoughts are. And Pericles says if you die for Athens, you'll be dead, but at least you died for a place that cared about your mind and cared about your thoughts. But Pericles has some more things to say. But these are four big ideas that Pericles at least touches on as he moves through his speech. And the speech works. It's an effective speech. It accomplishes the goal of the speaker. It revitalizes the morale of the people. It reminds the people what the war is all about. In fact, what every war is all about, that in wars there are winners and losers. And the winners impose their values on the losers. That's what war is all about. Winners and losers, and the winners impose their values on the losers. And Pericles asks, whose values do you want to live under, Athenian values or Spartan values? Because it's going to be one or the other. And which one do you want to live under? He reminds them of what the war is all about. He rebuilds the morale of the people. But for us in this course, what I think is kind of interesting, looking at this brief summary and paraphrase of Pericles' speech, is that as I gave you that short summary and paraphrase, you probably didn't hear an awful lot that was new. An awful lot of it isn't new to you. The idea of democracy isn't foreign to you. Certainly the word democracy isn't foreign to you. It's a word that Americans in particular like to hear. Americans, in fact, tend to call their own form of government a democracy, even though it isn't, because they like the word. It sounds nice. It sounds nice, because democracy sounds simple and it sounds fair. It just sounds fair. If you have a problem, then you get together all the people who care about the problem. Or what about the people who don't care about the problem? And who cares what they have to say about it? Get together all the people who care about the problem. Let them argue it out. They can, everybody gets to express their opinion. You can make bumper stickers and wave signs and do whatever you want to do. Post on Facebook your opinions about whatever, argue with everybody, and then at the end of the day, everybody just votes. Who cares to? Votes. And whatever most people want to do about this topic, about the problem, you just go ahead and do it. It just sounds simple. It sounds fair. Politicians use the word democracy an awful lot, even though they know better. Because, well, they figured out a long time ago politicians get elected by saying words people like to hear. And Americans like to hear the word democracy. And so when somebody's running for office, even if they're running for dog catcher, they've got to throw in the word democracy every once in a while because voters say, hey, I like that word. That guy said something I like to hear. Individualism, the idea that you have individual gifts and talents and abilities. You already know this. The ability to decide, well, we say it as a joke about college students, what do you want to be when you grow up? But you know what I mean. What do you want to do with your professional life? You've got the ability to make those decisions. A lot of you right now are right there in your lives. You're making decisions about what's the next step in my career, or what's my first career, or what career should I go into. You're sitting there and you're thinking, you know what? What should I do with my professional life? How am I going to make my living for the rest of my life? Um, um, None of this is new. I mean, we got rid of human sacrifices in my neighborhood a long time ago, probably yours too. I mean, it's kind of gotten past that one. Okay. None of this is really earth-shattering stuff. Okay. You've all heard this stuff before. But I suggest to you that if it weren't for the role of Athens in shaping the world that you live in and shaping the culture you live in, a lot of this stuff would be unfamiliar to you. I mean, none of this stuff is really new to you. I mean, this idea of rationalism, I mean, you're college students. You know that you don't pay nearly as much money in tuition, even with the hike over last year. You don't pay near what it costs to have me here and the lights on, the air conditioner blowing, and all of that. Uh, the state of Florida provides about half the money here, and students pay a little bit under half. And we've got a foundation here that goes out and raises donations from people for scholarship funding to round out the budget. None of this is new to you, but I suggest if it weren't for the role of Athens in shaping the world you live in, a lot of this stuff would be unfamiliar to you. The idea that you didn't need a dictator bossing you around, how unfamiliar that is. You know how unfamiliar that is to an awful lot of people in the world today who can't imagine what life is like? You know how many people in the world today live in a place where you have to get permission from the government to move to a new apartment? Around here, you're lease right. You say, do I want to stay here or go someplace new? Oh, you got to go file down with the government. You know, an awful lot of people are issued maps by the government telling them where they work, where they live, and which route they have to go every day. It's amazing how many people can't imagine living in a place where they didn't have somebody telling them what to do. I think back, I think it was just 3 summers ago with the demonstrations in Tehran. And there was a reporter from somewhere, I don't know, doing a person on the street interview and speaking to a young Iranian gentleman who spoke English, a young man, and very sharp, well educated. And the reporter says, so what do you want to come out of these protests? And he says, we want to live in democracy. And the reporter said, well, what does that mean to you? And he looked down at the ground, and he looked at the reporter, and he said, I don't know. Because I don't know what it would be like. I don't know what it would be like. But it's better than being told what to do. This guy, when asked to articulate what that would mean, I don't know, but it would be different. It'd be different than being told what to do. The idea that you can grow up and be whatever you want to be in your life within reason. I've lived and worked in parts of the world where you ask little kids what they want to do when they grow up and they don't have any idea what you're talking about. They look at you with a puzzle on their face and they don't understand what you mean. Not only that, it's never dawned on anyone in their village to ever think about what they wanted to be when they grew up. It never dawned on them. Why would they? For generations, nobody who's lived within 100 miles has ever thought about what they wanted to do when they grew up. It's never occurred to them. Well, we can go on here, but I think you get what I'm getting at. These are a lot of big things that people who grew up within a certain place kind of take for granted. But it's not taken for granted by an awful lot of people around the world. And I suggest to you very strongly that if it weren't for the role of Athens in shaping the world you live in, life would be very different. Well, for the next little while, we're going to be focused on a discussion of rationalism, the last thing on the list there, the life of the mind, thinking about stuff. We're going to be moving towards a discussion of philosophy.